and nobody was handing out scholarships based on your zip code. His father left the family when Julius was young. That absence shaped everything. His mother, Callie Mae Lindsay, became the only authority he knew, and she ran that household with discipline, faith, and zero tolerance for excuses. Years later, Erving would credit her publicly as the single greatest influence on his life. The composure, the dignity, the self-control that the world would eventually associate with Dr. J, all of that started in her living room. On the playgrounds of Roosevelt, Julius played every day. No trainers, no camps, no AAU circuits. Just pickup games, older guys testing him, and a kid whose hands were big enough to palm a basketball before most boys his age could palm a softball. He was learning the game the way a whole generation learned it, through competition, embarrassment, and repetition. And then there was the name. The most famous nickname in basketball history did not come from a sports writer or a television announcer. It started as a private thing, a running joke between Julius and his high school friend Leon Saunders. Later, when Erving turned professional, a teammate named Willie Sojourner shortened it, sharpened it, and made it stick. Dr. J, not a marketing campaign, not a brand deal, just two words passed between friends that wound up changing the vocabulary of the sport. By the time Julius Erving arrived at the University of Massachusetts in 1968, he was already one of the most gifted athletes on campus, but the NCAA had just banned the one weapon that would eventually make him immortal. Here is what people need to understand about Julius Erving's college career. He was doing things that almost nobody in the country saw. From 1968 to 1971, Erving played at the University of Massachusetts, not exactly a basketball powerhouse. No national television contracts, no primetime showcase games. Just a long, quiet campus in Amherst where a young man was putting up numbers that belonged in a time capsule. 26.3 points per game, 20.2 rebounds per game. He was one of only 6 players in NCAA history to average 20 and 20. Think about that. Not at UCLA. Not at North Carolina. At UMass, where the gyms were small and the spotlight was somewhere else entirely. But here is the detail that makes this chapter of the story almost unbelievable. In 1968, the NCAA banned dunking. The rule was widely understood to have been a response to the dominance of Lou Alcindor, the man who would become Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. So from the moment Julius Erving set foot on a college court, the single most electrifying part of his game was illegal in competition. His dunks existed only in practice. Teammates saw them, coaches saw them, nobody else did. The man who would eventually redefine what a human body could do above the rim spent 3 college seasons with that weapon locked away. The world had no idea what was coming. And then the decision came. After his junior year, Erving left UMass under the ABA's hardship rule. His mother was dealing with medical problems and the family needed money. This was not a young man chasing fame. This was a son trying to take care of the woman who had raised him alone. He turned professional in 1971, but he did not enter the NBA. He entered a rival league that most of America ignored, and he signed a contract that would later be exposed as one of the most lopsided deals in basketball history. The American Basketball Association in 1971 was professional basketball's other side of the tracks. Flashy, underfunded, desperate for attention, and stocked with players who were either too young, too unconventional, or too black for the NBA's front offices to care about. It was the perfect place for a talent like Julius Erving, and the worst possible place for his wallet. Erving signed a 4-year contract with the Virginia Squires worth $500,000, but the money was spread over 7 years. Later, it came to light that the agent who brokered the deal was simultaneously employed by the Squires themselves. The man who would become the most exciting player in professional basketball had been steered into a below-market contract by someone who was working for the other side of the table. None of that showed up on the court. As a rookie, Erving averaged 27.3 points per game. By his second season, 1972-73, he was averaging a career-best 31.9. He was the most dynamic player in the ABA, and arguably in all of professional basketball, playing in front of half-empty arenas in Virginia while the NBA pretended the league didn't exist. And then the legal mess started. A three-team, two-league dispute erupted over Erving's rights. The Milwaukee Bucks had drafted him in the NBA. The Atlanta Hawks had signed him to a separate deal. The Squires held his ABA contract. A federal judge stepped in with an injunction and sent Erving back to Virginia, but it was clear to everyone that the Squires were sitting on a player they couldn't afford and couldn't protect. Within 2 years, they sold him. The most exciting player in their league, gone, because the franchise couldn't write the checks his talent demanded. When the New York Nets acquired Julius Erving from the cash-strapped Virginia Squires, they knew exactly what they were getting. And they paid accordingly, an 8-year contract reportedly worth $350,000 a year. For the first time in his professional life, Erving was being compensated like a franchise player. Now he had to play like one. He did more than that. He turned the Nets into champions. In 1974, Erving led the Nets to the ABA championship, defeating the Utah Stars. 2 years later, in 1976, he did it again, this time beating the Denver Nuggets in what would become the ABA's final championship series. In that 76 playoff run, Erving averaged 34.7 points per game and was named the most valuable player of the postseason. His final ABA season was historically unique. According to league records, 1975-76 was the only season in ABA or NBA history where a single player finished in the top 10 in every major statistical category simultaneously. Scoring, rebounding, assists, steals, blocks, all of it. Nobody had done it before. Nobody has done it since. But here was the tragedy buried inside the triumph. Almost nobody saw it. The ABA had minimal television coverage, no national broadcast deals, no highlight packages reaching living rooms across the country. Julius Erving was playing the most complete basketball of his life in a league that America could barely watch. His greatness was real, but it was largely invisible to the mainstream. And yet his reputation traveled anyway, word of mouth, playground legend. The few who saw him play told everyone else. Dr. J became the argument for the merger, the living proof that the ABA had talent the NBA could not afford to ignore. In 1976, the ABA finally merged with the NBA, and the celebration lasted about 5 minutes before the New York Knicks handed the Nets a bill for $4.8 million, setting off the chain of events that would rip Julius Erving away from New York forever. Before we talk about the money and the betrayal, we need to talk about the dunk. In 1976, the ABA held its inaugural Slam Dunk Championship, the first organized dunk contest in professional basketball history. Julius Erving entered, and what he did that day became one of the most replayed moments in the sport's existence. He started at the opposite free throw line, full stride, the ball cradled in one massive hand. He left the ground from behind the foul line, hung in the air longer than physics should have allowed, and threw the ball through the rim with a force that made the backboard shudder. The free throw line dunk. Remember, this was the man whose dunks had been banned in college, the man whose ABA highlights barely existed on television, and now in one single moment he showed the entire basketball world what they had been missing. That dunk didn't just win a contest, it rewrote the visual language of basketball. But off the court, the merger was turning into a disaster for Erving personally. The New York Knicks, as the established NBA franchise in the market, demanded $4.8 million from the Nets as a territorial fee for entering the league. The Nets owner, Roy Bowe, couldn't afford both the fee and the salary increase he had promised Erving. So Bowe broke his word. Erving held out. The Knicks were offered Erving's contract directly and turned it down. That decision has since been called one of the worst in franchise history. Meanwhile, a buyer emerged from Pennsylvania. The Philadelphia 76ers were willing to write a $3 million check for the right to call Dr. J their own. And just like that, the most exciting player the ABA had ever produced was heading to a new city, a new league, and the biggest stage of his career. If the Knicks didn't want Dr. J, somebody else did. and the Philadelphia 76ers were about to find out exactly what $3 million could buy. The Philadelphia 76ers didn't hesitate. In the fall of 1976, they wrote a check for $3 million, one of the largest sums ever paid for a single player at that time, and brought Dr. J to the NBA's biggest stage. Erving chose to wear number 6, not because it was available, not because it looked good, because it belonged to Bill Russell. The man who had won 11 championships in Boston, who had carried himself with a dignity that transcended the sport, that was the lineage Julius Erving wanted to claim. He wasn't just joining a new league, he was announcing where he believed he belonged in basketball history. The impact was immediate. In his first NBA season, the Sixers became the league's top drawing team. Fans who had only heard about Dr. J, who had never seen him play because the ABA barely existed on television, were now watching him live, and he delivered. Philadelphia roared through the 1977 playoffs and reached the NBA Finals against the Portland Trail Blazers. The Sixers took a 2-0 lead. It looked like a coronation, and then it fell apart. Portland won 4 straight, and the series was over. Just like that, from triumph to silence in the span of 2 weeks. Meanwhile, back in New York, the Nets were dying. Without Erving, the franchise collapsed to 22 wins and 60 losses. Roy Bowe, the owner who had let him go, later said publicly that the merger agreement lost his life the Nets as an NBA franchise. One man's departure had gutted an entire organization. Erving had his new city, he had the stage, but the championship, the one thing that would complete the story, kept slipping out of reach. And the wait was about to get longer, more painful, and more personal than anyone expected. The late 70s and early 80s belonged to one of the greatest rivalries basketball has ever seen, and Julius Erving was in the middle of all of it. The Philadelphia 76ers and the Boston Celtics met in the Eastern Conference Finals in 1980, 81, 82, and again in 85. 4 times in 6 years, Erving against Larry Bird, Philly against Boston. 2 franchises, 2 philosophies, 2 of the most competitive players alive, and neither one willing to give an inch. That rivalry was so defining that it inspired one of the first major sports video games, EA Sports 1-on-1, Dr. J versus Larry Bird. The matchup had crossed over from the court into popular culture. But before the Bird Wars became legend, Erving created a moment that still defies explanation. Game 4 of the 1980 NBA Finals, Los Angeles Lakers against Philadelphia. Erving drove baseline to the right side of the basket, left the ground, and somehow kept going, past the backboard, past the point where any normal player would have been forced to throw the ball away. He reached back behind the glass and laid it in with a reverse finish that made even the Lakers stop and stare. The baseline move. It has been replayed tens of thousands of times. It remains one of the 2 or 3 most famous individual plays in NBA history. In 1981, Erving was named the NBA's most valuable player. The award confirmed what everyone already knew. He was the best and most important player in the league, and yet the championship still would not come. The Sixers kept running into Boston. They kept coming close. They kept losing. By 1982, Erving had been a professional for over a decade. He had titles from a league that no longer existed. He had the MVP in a league that still wouldn't give him the ring, and the 76ers front office decided it was time to make the one move that could change everything. The missing piece had a name, and everybody in basketball knew it. Moses Malone, the reigning NBA Most Valuable Player, signed with Philadelphia prior to the 1982-83 season. He was the most dominant center in the game, a relentless rebounder and scorer who had carried the Houston Rockets as far as his body could take them. Now he was standing next to Dr. J. The Sixers weren't building a team. They were building a statement, and Moses made the statement himself before the playoffs even started. Asked how the postseason would go, Malone reportedly answered with 3 words that became part of basketball scripture. The prediction was bold and borderline reckless, and it turned out to be almost exactly right. Philadelphia went 12-1 in the 1983 playoffs. They swept the New York Knicks. They swept the Los Angeles Lakers in the finals. 12 wins, 1 loss. one of the most dominant postseason runs the league had ever seen. Moses Malone was named Finals MVP, but everyone understood what that championship meant for Julius Erving. This was his 7th NBA season, his 12th as a professional. He had carried teams, changed leagues, redefined positions, and now finally he had the ring. The man who made basketball fly had landed. Championships are supposed to change everything. For Julius Erving, 1983 was both the peak and the beginning of the descent. The years after the title were not dramatic or scandalous. They were something harder to watch, a gradual, visible erosion of the physical gifts that had made Dr. J unlike anyone else. His scoring average, which had been 22.4 points per game during the championship season, slid steadily downward. By 1985-86, it had dropped to 16.8. The hang time shortened. The drives to the basket came less often. The man who once played above the rim was learning to play below it. He was still effective, still respected, still capable of moments that reminded everyone who he was. But the nightly dominance was gone, and both Erving and the fans in Philadelphia knew it. The organization around him was changing too. Moses Malone, the force that had pushed the Sixers over the top, was traded to the Washington Bullets after the 85-86 season. The roster that had been built to win now was being dismantled. The Sixers' last deep playoff run of the Erving era came in 1985, when they lost to the Celtics in the Eastern Conference Finals. After that, the window closed. Philadelphia was no longer a championship contender. They were a team in transition, held together mostly by the presence of a legend who was running out of time. Watching greatness fade is one of the hardest things in sports. There is no enemy, no controversy, just the clock, doing what the clock always does. In the spring of 1987, Julius Erving announced that his 16th professional season would be his last, and the NBA gave him a farewell unlike anything the league had ever seen. No player before Julius Erving had received anything like it. When he announced prior to the 86-87 season that it would be his final year, arenas across the league responded with something that went beyond sportsmanship. Every road game became a ceremony. Standing ovations in cities where he had been the opponent for a decade. Gifts, tributes, video presentations. From Boston to Los Angeles, from Chicago to Detroit, the NBA stopped to say thank you to a man who had helped make the league what it was. Erving averaged 16.8 points per game that final season. He was 36 years old. The explosiveness was gone, but the intelligence, the footwork, the hands, those hadn't aged. He could still create shots that younger players couldn't imagine, even if his body could no longer finish them the way it once had. The Sixers made the playoffs but lost in the first round. There would be no storybook ending on the court, no final championship, no last-second shot to ride off into history. But the farewell itself became the story. The NBA had never collectively honored an active player this way. It set the template, the retirement tour, the city-by-city goodbye, the recognition that some careers are too important to let end quietly. When Kobe Bryant received his farewell tour decades later, the model had already been built. Dr. J built it. His final game came and went. The arena emptied. The uniform came off for the last time. 16 professional seasons, 5 in the ABA, 11 in the NBA, 3 championships, 4 MVP awards across both leagues. A career that had literally changed the way the game was played. The cheering stopped, the arena lights went dark, and the man who had changed basketball walked away. But the life waiting for Dr. J outside the game would prove far more complicated than anything he ever faced between the lines. Most athletes retire and disappear. Julius Erving retired and became a corporation. Within a few years of hanging up the jersey, he had moved into broadcasting, corporate endorsements, and business ownership, including an investment in a Coca-Cola bottling franchise that gave him a foothold in a world most former players never touched. He had been one of the first basketball players to have a signature shoe marketed under his name during his playing career, years before the sneaker industry became a billion-dollar arms race. Dr. J understood branding before the sports world had a word for it. In 1993, he was inducted into the Naismith Memorial Basketball Hall of Fame. 3 years later, the NBA named him to its 50 greatest players list. The honors confirmed what the record already showed. His career had reshaped the sport from the ground up. On paper, the post-basketball chapter looked flawless, dignified, controlled. Exactly what you'd expect from a man who had carried himself with composure through 16 professional seasons, 2 leagues, and every type of pressure the game could generate. But behind that polished surface, Julius Erving's private life was fracturing in ways the public didn't know about until the summer of 1999. During that year's Wimbledon tournament, a young tennis player named Alexandra Stevenson reached the semifinals, and the story that broke alongside her achievement had nothing to do with tennis. Reports confirmed that Stevenson's father was Julius Erving, the result of a relationship with sports writer Samantha Stevenson outside his marriage. The story detonated across tabloids and sports pages simultaneously. The contrast between Erving's carefully maintained public image and this private reality became unavoidable national news. His marriage to Turquoise Erving, which had lasted decades, eventually ended in divorce. The composure that had defined Dr. J on the court could not hold everything together off it. The cracks had been there, they just hadn't been visible until now. The public revelation was painful enough. But the worst moment of Julius Erving's personal life was still ahead, and it involved a loss that no amount of dignity or discipline could absorb. On May 28, 2000, Julius Erving's 19-year-old son Corey went missing. His car was found near a retention pond in Seminole County, Florida. For weeks, there were searches, press conferences, and the kind of agonizing silence that no family should have to endure in public. On July 6, 2000, Corey's remains were recovered from the pond. According to reports at the time, investigators concluded that the passing was consistent with an accident, but the details surrounding exactly what happened that night were never fully resolved to everyone's satisfaction. What was beyond dispute was the devastation it left behind. Julius Erving spoke publicly about his son's passing with the same measured composure he had brought to every other moment of his life, but the weight of it was visible. This was not a basketball loss, not a contract dispute, not a tabloid headline that would fade after a news cycle. This was permanent, irreversible, a father burying his child. In the years that followed, Erving referenced Corey's passing sparingly but honestly in interviews, making clear that the loss had reshaped his understanding of everything: success, legacy, faith, family. He did not perform grief for cameras. He carried it the way he had always carried things, privately, with as much control as the situation allowed. But some things cannot be controlled, and anyone who watched Julius Erving navigate those years understood that the price of being Dr. J, of being composed, dignified, unbreakable in public, was that the world never quite saw how much he was carrying. Here is what gets lost when people rank Julius Erving on all-time lists and argue about where he falls compared to the players who came after him. He didn't just play the game at a high level, he invented a version of the game that didn't exist before he showed up. Before Erving, basketball above the rim was power, big men dunking because they were close to the basket and tall enough to reach it. What Erving introduced was something entirely different: athleticism as artistry, hang time as expression. The idea that a player could leave the floor, make a decision in midair, adjust, create, and finish in a way that nobody had planned or practiced. He turned improvisation into the highest form of basketball skill. Michael Jordan has said publicly and repeatedly that Erving was his primary inspiration, not a casual influence, the model, the template. The reason Jordan believed a guard could dominate a game through above-the-rim creativity. Every player who followed that path, from Jordan to Dominique Wilkins to Vince Carter to LeBron James, is playing a style of basketball that Dr. J introduced to the professional game, and he did it under conditions that would have buried most legacies: a college career where his dunks were banned, an ABA career that barely existed on television, a contract dispute that sent him from New York to Philadelphia against his will, years of playoff heartbreak before the title finally came, 3 championships across 2 leagues, 4 MVP awards, Hall of Fame, 50 greatest, The resume is enormous, but the influence is even larger than the numbers. Erving didn't just succeed in basketball, he expanded what basketball was allowed to be. Julius Erving is in his 70s now. He lives quietly. He appears at events, does occasional interviews, and carries himself with the same self-possession that defined him when he was 22 years old and palming a red, white, and blue basketball in a league that half the country didn't know existed. His life after basketball contained pain that no championship ring could offset. The public unraveling of his marriage, the loss of his son, the exposure of secrets he had kept private for years. None of that erased what he built, but it complicated the narrative in ways that mattered, because Julius Erving was never a simple story, even when the highlights made him look like one. What remains when you strip away the personal heartbreak and the business deals and the tabloid chapters is this: a kid from Roosevelt, Long Island, raised by his mother in a house without a father, became the